Madrid, sole metro stop. The historic January snowfall that had paralyzed the capital, transforming it into a landscape where social contrasts blurred under a white blanket. Carmen Mendoza, age 7, daughter of billionaire businessman Carlos Mendoza, slipped away from her governess to approach a figure huddled under the marquee. Lucia Herrera, 24, was shivering, her feet bare and swollen from the cold, clutching a paper bag as her last possession. The girl offered her snack, speaking words that would alter two destinies. "You need a home, and I need a mom. Daddy has lots of empty rooms and an even emptier heart." Carlos, witnessing the scene, saw not desperation in the homeless woman's eyes, but a shattered dignity, as he would later discover. A brilliant doctor, destroyed by a corrupt system, wouldn't just change 3 lives, she would shake the foundations of Madrid's most exclusive circles. The unprecedented snowfall had turned Madrid into a surreal canvas where the boundaries between the upscale Salamanca district and working-class Lavapiés seemed erased under the uniform white. Carlos Mendoza had just picked up Carmen from the international school in La Moraleja when the encounter that would rewrite their fates occurred. The girl, with that fierce determination inherited from her late mother, broke free from the governess's grip and ran towards the metro stop. It wasn't the transport that drew her, but a human figure reduced to her most vulnerable essence. Lucia Herrera embodied the failure of an entire system. 24 years old. An honors graduate in medicine from Complutense University just 6 months prior, now reduced to shivering barefoot in the snow. Lucia's bare, swollen feet peeked out from under a tattered skirt. Her once elegant coat was torn and useless against the freezing Madrid wind. The brown paper bag she clutched contained the last vestige of her former life, her medical degree, now a useless parchment. Carmen stopped in front of her with the disarming naturalness of innocence, opened her designer backpack, and placed her gourmet snack next to the woman. Their eyes met in a moment of profound recognition that transcended words. Carmen saw beyond the external misery. Lucia saw in the girl's brown eyes the same eyes as her little sister, who had died years ago. The girl's words resonated in the frozen air with prophetic force as she wrapped her cashmere scarf around Lucia's neck. Carlos approached slowly, stunned by the scene. It wasn't his daughter's charity that surprised him, but the intuition with which she had recognized in that stranger something valuable that the world had discarded. Lucia tried to refuse the gifts, but her voice broke. She hadn't eaten in 3 days, and pride was losing the battle against basic survival. The story Lucia told through fragmented sobs painted a portrait of systemic injustice that Carlos knew all too well. A newly graduated doctor, a promising pediatric surgeon, she had made the fatal mistake of reporting the head of department, Dr. Ramirez, for sexual harassment. The hospital system had expelled her with surgical precision, false accusations, bought testimonies, career destroyed in 3 weeks. Her family had disowned her out of shame, her boyfriend disappeared, friends evaporated like morning dew. Carlos made an instant decision that would shock the entire Salamanca district. He called his chauffeur and ordered the guest suite prepared in his mansion on Serrano Street. Lucia protested weakly, but Carmen had already orchestrated everything, taking the woman's hand with her left and her father's with her right, joining them in a gesture that brooked no argument. During the ride in the Mercedes, the contrast was surreal. Lucia with her bare feet resting on the leather seats. Carmen chattering happily about her new family project. Carlos observing in the rearview mirror this broken but still dignified woman. When Lucia fainted from malnutrition and hypothermia, Carlos carried her into the house with a tenderness he hadn't shown since Isabel had died. The family doctor, called urgently, diagnosed what Carlos had suspected. Not only malnutrition and early pneumonia, but signs of recent violence. Someone had beaten Lucia to steal her last few euros. The cold rage that grew in Carlos hadn't been seen since his wife's death from cancer 2 years earlier. But it was Carmen who verbalized what everyone was thinking, defining Lucia as a fallen angel they must help regain her wings. That first night, as Lucia slept safely for the first time in months, Carlos kept vigil by the fireplace with Carmen asleep in his arms. His daughter's words echoed in his mind like a persistent refrain. Since Isabel had died, he had armored his heart, concentrating only on work and Carmen. But that barefoot young woman had opened a crack in the wall he had built, a crack through which a forgotten light was seeping. Lucia's awakening in the Mendoza mansion suite was like emerging from a nightmare into an impossible dream. The contrast between the luxury surrounding her and the months on the street created a dissonance that deeply disoriented her. But Carmen's cheerful voice calling at the door with breakfast anchored her to the reality of this unexpected miracle. In the following days, as Lucia regained physical strength, her complete story emerged like a mosaic of intertwined injustices. Daughter of Andalusian immigrants in Carabanchel, she had climbed the social mountain on her own merit. Scholarships, nights working in bars to support herself, 6 consecutive years as top of her class. The position on Dr. Ramirez's team at La Paz Hospital had been the culmination of infinite sacrifices. Ramirez had destroyed everything in one June night, the assault in his office, Lucia's courageous complaint, and then the destruction machine that swung into action. The doctor had connections everywhere: politics, judiciary, media. Lucia was accused of falsifying documents, stealing medications, mental instability. Her father, humiliated by the daughter who had supposedly seduced the boss, kicked her out. Her mother, submissive, didn't dare oppose. Her boyfriend, a lawyer, abandoned her to avoid compromising his rising career. Carlos listened with growing, controlled fury. He knew Ramirez. They had crossed paths at charity galas for Niño Jesus Hospital. The man was considered untouchable, but Carlos Mendoza was no ordinary man. He was the real estate king of Madrid, with contacts reaching the Prime Minister's office and beyond. The most expensive private detective in Spain was hired to investigate Ramirez's past. Meanwhile, Carlos observed with new eyes this woman destiny had placed in his path. It wasn't just the natural beauty emerging now that Lucia was fed and rested. It was the way she interacted with Carmen, naturally filling that maternal void with a sweetness that amazed the entire staff. Lucia spent hours with the girl, helping with homework, teaching basic medical concepts turned into games, reading stories with different voices for each character. The mansion staff noticed how Carmen, who had suffered from recurring nightmares for 2 years, now slept peacefully. How she smiled more. Laughed with that spontaneity she had lost with her mother. The turning point came when Carmen fell ill with a high fever. Lucia transformed into a force of nature, watching over the girl for 3 nights, using her medical knowledge with a dedication that transcended any obligation. Carlos found her at 4 a.m. softly singing the same lullaby Isabel used to sing, a song Carmen must have taught her during their afternoons together. It was in that moment, seeing Lucia cradle his feverish daughter with genuine maternal love, that Carlos understood he had fallen in love. It wasn't gratitude or forced proximity. It was the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone who had known pain and transformed it into compassion rather than bitterness. The detective returned with explosive results. Lucia wasn't Ramirez's first victim. 5 residents in the last 10 years had suffered the same treatment. 2 had committed suicide. 3 had disappeared into the limbo of unemployment and shame. Carlos now had the proof, the testimonies, the documents to destroy Ramirez. But above all, he had the certainty that Lucia deserved justice and so much more. The war against the corrupt system began with military precision. Carlos didn't seek emotional vengeance, but systematic justice. Every move was calculated for maximum impact. First, the evidence to the right journalists nationally and internationally. Then political pressure through contacts. Finally, coordinated legal action with the other victims, protected by anonymity. The press conference at the Ritz Hotel was an earthquake that shook the foundations of Madrid's healthcare system. Carlos spoke not only as a powerful businessman, but as a widowed father who had seen the system fail twice. First with his wife Isabel, dead due to delayed diagnoses from doctors more interested in power than patients. Then with Lucia, a brilliant promise destroyed for daring to report abuse. The public exposure of Ramirez was methodical and devastating. The testimonies of the 5 previous victims, verified and documented, painted a picture of systematic abuse over a decade. Lucia sat in the front row with Carmen holding her hand, silent tears streaming down her face as the truth finally emerged into the light. The domino effect was immediate. Ramirez was suspended, then arrested. Other doctors found the courage to report abuses they had witnessed or suffered. A wave of cleansing swept through not only La Paz, but other Madrid hospitals. The rector of Complutense University, under media pressure and with overwhelming proof of Lucia's innocence, not only reinstated her credentials but offered her a fully funded specialization in pediatrics, the dream she had always nurtured. But while the outside world applauded this victory for justice, a more intimate drama unfolded in the Mendoza mansion. The attraction between Carlos and Lucia had become impossible to ignore. Dinners had turned into moments of deep conversation about literature, medicine, philosophy. Lucia displayed a culture and intelligence that fascinated Carlos, while he revealed a sensitivity and depth unknown to the business world. It was Carmen, with her disarming innocence, who catalyzed the inevitable during a dinner. Watching the two adults exchange glances thinking they weren't seen, the girl posed the question everyone was avoiding. Her childish logic was irrefutable: they loved each other, they were happy together, she needed a mother. The emotional mathematics of a 7-year-old cut through all social complications. The conversation that followed that night after putting Carmen to bed took place in the living room, with Madrid illuminated beyond the windows. Lucia confessed her love, but also her fears: the social gap, the debt of gratitude, the fear of being seen as a social climber. Carlos interrupted her with a kiss worth more than 1,000 explanations, followed by words about the mutual salvation they had offered each other. But exclusive Madrid wasn't ready for this modern fairy tale. When news of the relationship leaked, the attacks were fierce and coordinated. Tabloids published photos of Lucia from her homeless months with surgical cruelty. Carlos's mother, a matriarch of old Madrid society, summoned Lucia for a talk that was a calculated attempt at humiliation. The offer of €1,000,000 to disappear was rejected with a dignity that surprised even the old Mrs. Mendoza. The decisive moment came during Christmas dinner at the grandmother's house. Carmen, with the courage of children who see truth beyond conventions, stood up before the entire assembled family and made a speech that left everyone speechless. She spoke about the mommy in heaven who had sent Lucia, about true love that can't be bought, about her decision to choose Lucia even if the whole world was against it. The girl then took Lucia's hand and led her out of the dining room, followed by Carlos. The message was clear: their family against the world, if necessary. The choice was made and admitted no compromise. The new year brought storms that tested the solidity of this nascent family. Lucia's father, Antonio Herrera, showed up with a lawyer threatening to reveal compromising information if he didn't receive €5,000,000. The blackmail was despicable. He threatened to make public Lucia's suicide attempt during her months on the street, painting her as mentally unstable. The situation worsened when Ramirez, under house arrest, orchestrated his revenge from the shadows. Authentic but decontextualized photos emerged of Lucia during her homeless period, scavenging in dumpsters, sleeping in Atocha station, accepting €20 from a man in an alley. The tabloids exploded with ferocious headlines insinuating prostitution. Lucia packed her bags to leave, convinced she had to protect Carmen and Carlos from this mud. But when she tried to slip away at dawn, she found Carmen sitting on the stairs with her own suitcase, determined to follow her anywhere. The scene that followed, the girl refusing to let Lucia go, Carlos tearing up the farewell letters, definitively cemented their bonds. Carlos reacted with a brilliant media counteroffensive. Instead of defending, he attacked the system that allowed people like Lucia to end up on the streets. He showed statistics of homeless people with university degrees, the failure of the welfare system, the hypocrisy of a society that judges victims instead of helping them. The announcement of the Isabel and Lucia Foundation, with an initial donation of €20,000,000, transformed the narrative from scandal to inspiration. But the hardest blow was yet to come. During a hospital gala, Ramirez appeared and publicly revealed the last secret. Lucia had been pregnant when she ended up on the street and had lost the baby due to malnutrition. Lucia's emotional collapse was total, but Carlos lifted her in his arms and carried her out before all of Madrid in a gesture that became symbolic of absolute protection. That night, as Lucia mourned the never-processed loss of her baby, Carlos and Carmen surrounded her with a love that asked nothing in return. Carmen, with wisdom impossible for her age, spoke of the baby as an angel watching over them, the reason they had found each other. Her simple words began the healing process Lucia had never been able to face alone. Ramirez's trial became the case of the year. Lucia testified with courage, sustained each day by the presence of Carlos and Carmen in the front row. When the sentence of 15 years was pronounced, Lucia didn't celebrate. She simply turned to her new family and whispered that now they could truly begin to live. Carlos's marriage proposal came that same night, spontaneous and perfect in its simplicity. Not on bended knee with a fairy tale ring, but sitting together on the sofa, with Carmen jumping for joy, having already planned every detail of her bridesmaid dress. The engagement announcement unleashed a war that divided Madrid into two camps. The old guard of high society saw the union as an unforgivable scandal, while a new generation read in it a love story that transcended social barriers. Carlos's mother intensified her opposition with concrete threats, disinheritance, removal from control of the family business, even a legal battle for custody of Carmen, citing the inappropriate environment. The ultimatum was brutal in its simplicity: Lucia or the empire. Carlos didn't hesitate. Before the urgently convened board of directors, he presented his resignation with words that would become legendary in Madrid business circles. He had already lost one wife on the altar of success. He wouldn't lose love a second time for money he couldn't take to the grave. But Lucia couldn't accept Carlos sacrificing everything for her. Internal conflict tormented her. How could she be the cause of ruin for the man she loved? The answer came from the unexpected support of key Mendoza real estate employees, who threatened mass resignations, and from long-standing clients who declared loyalty to Carlos, not to the company. Within 48 hours, the old Mrs. Mendoza had to back down. The most dramatic turn came when 10 women, inspired by Lucia's story, came forward with their own testimonies of abuse in the Madrid healthcare system. Lucia had involuntarily become a symbol, and her story had opened a Pandora's box no one could close again. Public opinion shifted decisively in her favor. During Ramirez's trial, each session saw the courtroom packed with supporters. When Lucia testified, the silence was so complete only the stenographer's keystrokes were heard. Her dignity in recounting the horrors suffered, her insistence not on demonizing but on demanding systemic change, won over even the most skeptical. But it was Carmen's testimony that proved decisive in public opinion. The girl, called to speak about the period when Lucia entered their lives, described in simple words how the sadness had disappeared from their home, how Daddy had started smiling again, how she had gotten a mother back. No rhetoric, just the truth of a child who had seen love conquer prejudice. The guilty verdict for Ramirez, 15 years for continued sexual assault and abuse of authority, was met with applause in the courtroom. But Lucia didn't celebrate. She turned to Carlos and Carmen and said simply that now they could build their future without shadows. The wedding was set for spring, not at La Almudena Cathedral as Madrid society expected, but in a small church in Carabanchel, the working-class neighborhood where Lucia had grown up. A powerful, symbolic gesture, not forgetting one's origins, not renouncing the past, building the future on authenticity. On the wedding day, Madrid dawned under a spring sun that seemed to bless the impossible union. The small church of San Sebastián in Carabanchel overflowed not with celebrities and cameras, but with real people, former homeless individuals helped by the foundation, medical colleagues who had supported Lucia, loyal employees of Carlos, and above all Carmen, radiant in her role as bridesmaid and emotional architect of this union. Lucia walked to the altar alone, having rejected her father's hypocritical offer, but she wasn't alone. Each step was accompanied by smiles of gratitude from those she had helped or who had helped her. When she reached Carlos, he had tears in his eyes and wasn't ashamed of them. The most moving moment came when Carlos's mother stood up during the ceremony. Everyone held their breath, fearing a last opposition, but the woman approached Lucia and, with a broken voice, asked for forgiveness. She had seen true love. She had understood that Isabel would have been happy. She gave her Isabel's wedding veil, which Lucia put on with tears of gratitude and reconciliation. Carmen read a letter she had written, speaking of broken families becoming whole, of angels sending other angels, of children's hearts knowing things adults forget. There wasn't a dry eye in the church when she concluded by saying that now they were complete. A year later, the Mendoza mansion hosted another celebration. Lucia was pregnant with twins, and Carmen was ecstatic at the idea of becoming a big sister ×2. The pregnancy was difficult. The traumas of the past, the malnutrition suffered, had left their marks. But Carmen transformed into Lucia's little assistant, creating an even deeper bond. The twins, Isabel and Mateo, were born on a night in January, almost exactly 1 year after the encounter at the metro stop. When Carlos held them for the first time, with Carmen stroking their little heads and Lucia smiling, exhausted but radiant, the circle was complete. The impossible family had become reality. The Isabel and Lucia Foundation, meanwhile, had become a national model: 3 shelters, dozens of scholarships, hundreds of people saved from the streets. Lucia divided her time between the hospital, where she had become a respected pediatrician, and the foundation, where her direct experience made all the difference. 5 years after that day at the metro stop, the family had grown even more. A 4th child was on the way. Carmen was a wise teenager who talked about opening centers worldwide to unite lonely children and lonely parents. During a normal dinner, with the twins causing mischief and Carmen helping, the family seemed painted by an artist of extraordinary normalcy. The framed photo in the hallway captured the initial moment: Lucia barefoot and trembling, Carmen offering her snack, Carlos observing. Below it, in Carmen's childish handwriting from back then, the day our family began. That night, as snow fell again on Madrid, Lucia watched from the window the metro stop where it had all begun. Carlos embraced her from behind while the children slept. No words were needed to express the miracle they lived every day. Carmen, now a teenager, had added extra characters to the family nativity scene: a barefoot woman finding shelter, a girl reaching out her hand, a man opening his home. Because miracles, she had understood, don't descend from heaven fully formed. They are born from simple gestures of compassion, from children who see beyond appearances, from adults who find the courage to love beyond conventions. Today, the foundation has saved over 1,000 people. Lucia is head of pediatrics at Niño Jesus Hospital. Carlos has transformed his empire into a model of social enterprise. But when asked about her greatest achievement, Carmen always answers the same way, with the simplicity that changed everything. She found a mother for herself and a home for Lucia. And in that disarming simplicity lies all the truth of love. It doesn't calculate, doesn't measure, doesn't discriminate. It sees a soul in need and another that can give, and unites them, even if one is barefoot in the snow and the other rides in a Mercedes. Because in the end, as a 7-year-old understood, we're all looking for the same thing: someone to tell us, you need a home, and I need you. The miracle hadn't been the encounter. The miracle had been the courage to transform that encounter into family, to choose love above all social logic, to believe that a child could see more clearly than all the adults blinded by conventions. Madrid kept snowing, but in the mansion on Serrano Street, the warmth of a family forged in love melted any coldness. The girl who had seen an angel in a beggar, the man who had opened his home and his heart, the woman who had risen from her ashes. All united in a story proving that true love knows no social classes, only souls that recognize each other. Like if you believe children see love more clearly than adults. Comment with the moment that touched your heart most. Share with someone who needs to know it's never too late to start over. Subscribe for more stories showing how one gesture of kindness can change entire destinies.